Imagine taking basically a chemical sledgehammer to your own immune system.
Mm.
You take this powerful drug specifically designed to just completely shut down your body's natural defenses, right? Forcing your immune cells into total submission.
Yeah, you're essentially handcuffing the system.
Exactly. But now, imagine taking a syringe full of millions of microscopic instruction manuals, injecting them into your bloodstream, and letting them tell those very same cells to wake up, repair tissue, and change their behavior.
Do those two forces cancel each other out? Do they trigger, a catastrophic system failure, or do they combine to create this sort of medical superpower?
It's the ultimate biological paradox. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to extract the most vital insights from a huge stack of recent medical research papers, clinical trial protocols, and scientific reviews.
And we are really focusing on those microscopic instruction manuals you mentioned, tiny cellular structures known as exosomes.
Right. And for you listening, the easiest way to visualize an exosome is, well, to think of a cellular flash drive.
Hmm.
A cell in your body loads up one of these microscopic flash drives with complex data like RNA, proteins, genetic code, and just ships it out.
Yeah, that drive floats through your system until it physically plugs into another cell, uploading its data and totally changing how that receiving cell behaves.
Which brings us to the core puzzle of today's deep dive. We are trying to answer one highly complex, incredibly relevant question. Can these therapeutic exosomes be safely administered to a patient who is actively taking systemic immunosuppressive or biologic drugs?
Right, because historically we pictured cells as these isolated factories,
Oh,
but
yeah.
exosomes prove they're constantly talking.
Exactly. So for anyone listening who might be dealing with an autoimmune condition, or if you're just tracking the absolute bleeding edge of immunology, this is the frontier. If you are already on a heavy-duty biologic or immune system is blindfolded.
And diving into the literature, what happens when you mix exosomes into that volatile environment is, well, it's incredibly nuanced.
I bet.
We see scenarios where exosomes act as this flawless, synergistic partner to these harsh drugs. But we also see contexts where they act as a complete wild card, introducing severe risks.
Okay, so before we start throwing these therapies together in a theoretical mixing bowl, we need a baseline, right? We have to understand what therapeutic exosomes naturally do to an immune system.
Yeah, and we are mostly talking about mesenchymal stem cell-derived exosomes, or MSC exos. Since mesenchymal stem cells are essentially the body's natural medics, it makes sense that their exosomes are naturally immunomodulatory.
Meaning they calm the system down.
They do, but they do it in a very sophisticated way. When
Mhm.
we look at the cargo inside these MSC exosomes, specifically the microRNAs and proteins, we see profound effects on activated T cells.
And T cells are like the foot soldiers driving inflammation in an autoimmune response.
Yeah. Exactly. The exosomes deliver genetic instructions that literally force these hyperactive T cells into what biologists call cell cycle arrest at the G0 phase.
Okay, let's unpack that. Cell cycle arrest at G0. The G0 phase is essentially a resting state, right?
Exactly.
So the cell is still alive, but it's been taken completely out of the replication cycle. It's I don't know, putting a car's transmission into neutral. The engine is running, but it's not moving forward.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. The exosome forces the attacking T cells into neutral so they stop multiplying. And simultaneously, the exosome cargo induces the creation of regulatory T cells, or TREGs.
So if standard T cells are the foot soldiers, TREGs are what, the commanding officers?
Yeah, they're the officers blowing the whistle, telling everyone to stand down and stop the attack.
Hold on, though. I'm looking at this from the perspective of a patient who is already taking a massive dose of a systemic immunosuppressant. The drug is already wiping out immune activity.
Right.
If we add exosomes that put remaining T cells into neutral and boost the peacekeeper cells, aren't we just suppressing the immune system way too much? Doesn't that leave the patient defenseless against, like, a basic cold?
That was the initial fear among researchers. If you stack suppressants, you risk bottoming out the patient's immunity entirely.
Yeah, that seems like the logical outcome.
But the data reveals something totally different. What's fascinating here is that systemic drugs, like traditional steroids, they're the sledgehammers. They smash the entire immune response flat.
Okay.
Exosomes, on the other hand, act much more like a thermostat.
Oh, I see. So they read the room and adjust rather than just freezing the whole house.
Exactly. They are a smart therapy. Because their cargo is highly complex, they target specific inflammatory pathways. They don't just endlessly suppress, they work to restore homeostasis. They deliver blueprints that teach the immune system how to behave normally again.
Wow. So if they act as a thermostat, then pairing them with a chemical sledgehammer could be the ultimate one-two punch.
It really could.
Let's look at how this plays out with a specific condition from our sources. Alopecia areata, which is a severe autoimmune disease where the body attacks its own hair follicles. The standard heavy-duty treatment being researched involved JK inhibitors, specifically a drug called baricitinib.
Right, and JAK inhibitors are incredibly potent systemic immunosuppressants. To understand how they work, imagine the immune system communicating via radio towers.
Okay, radio towers.
The Janus kinase, or JK pathways, are the actual antennas on the surface of the cells receiving the signals to trigger inflammation.
Got it.
Baricitinib basically climbs up the tower and snaps the antenna off.
So the inflammatory signal gets sent by the body, but the cell never actually receives it.
Exactly. The problem is, taking a JAK inhibitor long-term to keep hair growing comes with significant systemic side effects. You're snapping off antennas all over the body, not just on the scalp.
And this is where the sources show the exosome stepping in as this complementary partner.
Yes. The strategy emerging is using the JK inhibitor for the heavy lifting up front. You use the drug to stop the aggressive autoimmune attack that's destroying the follicle.
So once the battlefield is clear, you introduce the exosomes.
Exactly. And the preclinical data for this combination is striking. The exosomes maintain a localized state of immune privilege around the hair follicle.
Meaning they keep the attacking cells away.
Right. But more importantly, they trigger the actual regeneration of the hair by activating the 1-beta-catenin pathway.
The 1-beta-catenin pathway. That sounds like a heavy textbook term, so let's explain how it actually regrows hair.
Think of that pathway as the master architectural blueprint for a hair follicle. In alopecia, the stem cells that build the hair go dormant.
Okay.
When the exosome plugs into those dormant stem cells, it delivers proteins that cause beta-catenin to accumulate inside the cell, travel to the nucleus, and physically flip the genetic switch that says, start printing new hair.
So the drug clears the fire out of the building, and the exosome comes in, calms the embers, and hands the construction crew the blueprints to rebuild.
Precisely.
That sounds miraculous, but let me push back here for a second. We are talking about using exosomes to wake up dormant cells, force them to survive, and rapidly grow new tissue.
Right.
At the exact same time, the patient's immune system, the thing that normally hunts down rogue, rapidly growing cells, is blindfolded by the JK inhibitor. Aren't we creating a massive risk for cancer?
You've hit on the exact reason why clinical trials are moving at a glacial pace. The technical term is oncogenic risk. Exosomes promote cell survival and blood vessel growth, which is called angiogenesis.
Yeah, which tumors love.
Exactly. If a patient happens to have a microscopic, undetectable cluster of precancerous cells, and we flood their system with survival signals while their immune system is chemically suppressed, there is a very real theoretical risk that we could accidentally accelerate a tumor.
Wow, so the synergy is there, but the safety guardrails are still being heavily debated, and yet researchers are pushing this synergy even further.
Oh, they definitely are.
They aren't just giving the drug and the exosome side by side anymore. The papers we reviewed included this mind-blowing study on lupus nephritis, where they literally fused the drug and the exosome together.
Ah, yes. The RAPA-A at MXPL platform, it is a stunning piece of bioengineering.
Let's break that down. First off, lupus nephritis is a severe, often fatal inflammation of the kidneys caused by systemic lupus erythematosus.
And the standard treatment involves a drug called rapamycin. Rapamycin is potent, but it has a nasty reputation. It causes massive off-target toxicity because it just goes everywhere in the body.
It causes a lot of collateral damage.
Right. So to bypass that toxicity, the researchers took the rapamycin and, using an ultrasound method, they physically forced the drug inside a mesenchymal stem cell-derived exosome.
They loaded our biological flash drive with a toxic immunosuppressive payload. But wait, if rapamycin is so toxic that it damages other organs, what is stopping this exosome from just leaking the drug while it's floating through the bloodstream? How does it know to only release it at the kidney?
That is where the second layer of this engineering marvel comes in. They coated the outside of this exosome with a shell made of polyleucine, or PLL.
Polyleucine, what does that do?
It's a polymer that carries a very strong positive electrostatic charge.
Positive static electricity. Why wrap the exosome in a positive charge?
Because it turns the exosome into a microscopic homing missile that also acts as a vacuum cleaner.
A vacuum cleaner.
Yeah. We have to look at the trigger for lupus. In a lupus patient, there are high levels of cell-free DNA, or cfDNA, floating in the blood. This is essentially shattered microscopic debris from dying cells.
And the immune system sees this floating debris and panics.
Exactly. It detects it via a cellular alarm system called TLR9. Normally, TLR9 is looking for viral or bacterial DNA, but in lupus, it mistakes the body's own shattered cell debris for a massive viral invasion. Oh, wow. So it launches a devastating attack on the kidneys.
Yes. Now, that cell-free DNA carries a strong negative charge.
Okay, I see where this is going. So the positive polylysine shell meets the negative cell-free DNA. They're literally turning the exosome into a magnet.
Exactly. And as that magnetic exosome travels through the blood, it physically attracts, binds to, and sweeps up all that toxic, inflammatory, cell-free DNA, neutralizing the alarm bells.
That's brilliant.
It is. Plus, the kidney tissues themselves have a specific charge dynamic when inflamed, which naturally draws the polylysine-coated exosome directly into the tissue. It doesn't leak in the blood because the physical chemistry of the shell keeps it intact.
And once it docks in the kidney.
It delivers the internal rapamycin directly into the inflamed cells. The rapamycin then targets the mTOR pathway.
Right, the mTOR pathway.
It's essentially the central engine regulating cell growth and metabolism. In lupus, that engine is stuck in overdrive. The rapamycin cuts the fuel line, inhibiting the pathway without spreading toxicity to the rest of the body. The analogy that comes to mind here is like a Trojan horse, but in reverse.
How do you mean?
Well, instead of sneaking an attacking army into a healthy city, you are sneaking a highly targeted fire extinguisher directly into a burning building. And while this reverse Trojan horse is being pulled through the streets, the outside of the horse is actively sucking the smoke out of the air.
I love that. And it drastically outperforms standard treatments. In lupus-prone models, this engineered exosome achieved far superior disease remission using a fraction of the standard drug dose.
Entirely avoiding the systemic toxicity of just pumping the body full of rapamycin.
Exactly.
Okay, so we are seeing incredible synergy when exosomes are paired with drugs. But what happens when the sledgehammer completely fails?
Right.
What happens when a patient is on maximum systemic immunosuppression and their disease simply ignores the drug and continues to destroy their body?
For that, we turn to the clinical data on graft versus host disease, or GVHD. This is a life-threatening complication that occurs after a patient receives a bone marrow or stem cell transplant, typically for blood cancers like leukemia.
Right, the donor's immune cells, the graft, recognize the patient's body, the host, as a foreign threat.
And the new immune system starts attacking the patient's skin, liver, and heavily targeting the gut.
So the standard first-line defense is to hit the patient with massive doses of systemic steroids, right? Just force the donor cells to stop the attack.
Yes. But a terrifying percentage of patients develop steroid-refractory GVHD.
Meaning the steroids do absolutely nothing.
Nothing. The patient is suffering the side effects of extreme immunosuppression, but the transplanted immune cells are still shredding their organs. It is one of the most dire clinical scenarios in medicine.
And this is where therapeutic exosomes are being evaluated as a last resort rescue mission, according to the sources.
Exactly. When researchers administered MSC-derived exosomes to these steroid-refractory patients, the results fundamentally challenged how we view immune recalibration.
How are the exosomes succeeding where the heaviest chemical sledgehammers are failing?
Because they bypass the standard receptor blockades. They deliver highly specific microRNAs, particularly one called miR165P.
And what does that do?
When this microRNA enters the donor's overactive T cells, it alters their behavior at a genetic level. It downregulates the specific signaling pathways that are driving the aggressive attack on the host tissue.
Wow.
But the real breakthrough is what happens in the gut.
Because the inflammation in GVHD absolutely destroys the epithelial barriers in the patient's intestines.
Right. The exosomes don't just stop the attack, they deliver growth factors that actively stimulate the regeneration of that intestinal barrier. They restore the structural integrity of the gut lining, which is crucial for survival.
So they put out the fire and immediately start pouring new concrete for the foundation.
Yeah.
But there is a massive catch here with transplant medicine.
There is.
If you are treating a patient for leukemia with a transplant, you actually want the donor's immune cells to attack something. You want them to hunt down any residual cancer cells left in the patient's body.
Right, the graft versus leukemia effect, or GVL. It is the entire purpose of the transplant. You need a highly controlled, targeted fight.
But the problem with systemic steroids is that they are totally indiscriminate. They stop the GVHD, but they also completely wipe out the beneficial GVL effect, leaving the patient extremely vulnerable to a cancer relapse.
Which is what makes the exosome data so profound. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the studies indicate that because therapeutic exosomes recalibrate the immune network rather than obliterating it, they can suppress the dangerous, organ-destroying GVHD without sacrificing the beneficial graft versus leukemia effect.
Suppressing the bad attack while preserving the targeted cancer hunting attack. That is the holy grail of immunology.
It really is.
Listening to all this, the Wnt pathway activation for alopecia, the electrostatic delivery for lupus, preserving the cancer fight in GVHD, it feels like a massive triumph. But we have to look at the reality on the ground.
Right.
When we examine actual human clinical trial protocols, we hit a massive brick wall.
The discrepancy between laboratory potential and clinical application is pretty stark right now.
I am looking directly at a specific clinical trial protocol from our sources, NCT 07144241. They are testing MSC exosomes for type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And when you read the explicit exclusion criteria, they're banning patients currently undergoing immunosuppressive therapy and anyone with severe autoimmune diseases.
Yep.
So what does this all mean? If these exosomes are the perfect complement to immunosuppressants, why are human trials actively banning the exact patients who are taking those drugs?
It comes down to two major hurdles: heterogeneity and immunogenicity. The FDA has issued multiple public warnings explicitly stating that there are no approved exosome products on the market yet.
And the reason is heterogeneity, meaning an exosome's cargo is not uniform.
Right. It depends entirely on where it came from, the cell type, how it was cultured in a bioreactor, how the laboratory actually purified the batch.
So one vial of exosomes might have a completely different profile of microRNAs than a vial from a different lab.
Exactly. Regulatory agencies demand standardization. If you are going to mix an unpredictable, highly complex biological packet with a powerful systemic immunosuppressant in a human being, the potential for an unforeseen chemical interaction is simply too high.
And beyond the lack of standardization, there is the risk of the body violently rejecting the therapy. Immunogenicity. Some of the research we pulled is testing exosomes derived from bovine colostrum.
Cow's milk.
Yeah, cow's milk.
Yes, because it is abundant, cheap, and easily scalable for mass production.
But if you inject cow exosomes into a human bloodstream repeatedly, even if that human is on an immunosuppressant, their immune system is eventually going to recognize those tiny packets as a foreign animal protein, right?
Exactly. The patient would develop anti-exosome antibodies. The very therapy designed to calm the immune system could trigger a severe, acute immune rejection event.
Wow.
You have to prove the exosome works safely as a standalone monotherapy before you introduce the chaotic variables of combining it with heavy-duty biologics.
That makes sense. But the most alarming red flag we uncovered in the sources came from the data on rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh, yes, the dark side of exosomes.
We spent all this time talking about engineered therapeutic exosomes as the medical cavalry, but the RA research exposes a much darker reality about the exosomes naturally occurring inside our own bodies. They can actually propagate drug resistance.
This flips the entire paradigm. In a disease state like rheumatoid arthritis, the pathogenic inflammatory cells use their own exosomes to send out survival signals to neighboring cells.
They use the cellular flash drives to coordinate a defense against our medication. Let's trace the logic there. Say you are treating a patient with a heavy-duty biologic like an anti-TNF drug. Anti-TNF drugs work by neutralizing the specific proteins that sound the body's inflammatory alarm.
Right.
But then you inject a massive dose of therapeutic stem cell exosomes to try and assist the healing process. We don't fully understand the crosstalk occurring in the bloodstream.
We really don't. The severe risk is that the therapeutic exosomes, which are explicitly designed to protect cells, promote survival, and block cell death, might accidentally shield the pathogenic inflammatory cells from the biologic drug.
So instead of a tag team, the biologic drug and the exosome end up working at cross purposes. And we inadvertently engineer a scenario where the patient becomes totally resistant to their life-saving primary medication.
That is the ultimate cautionary tale of modern immunology, and it completely justifies the conservative approach of the clinical trials.
Okay, so to synthesize this massive deep dive for you listening at home, can exosomes be safely administered to patients actively taking systemic immunosuppressants or biologics?
Well, the laboratory and preclinical evidence points to a resounding yes, and we should.
Right. The research proves they can enhance drugs like JK inhibitors, serve as incredibly smart targeted delivery vessels to eliminate drug toxicity like we saw with lupus, and rescue patients when the heaviest chemical sledgehammers fail.
But the clinical and regulatory reality remains proceed with extreme caution until the scientific community can guarantee standardized manufacturing, prove that we aren't accelerating hidden cancers, and fully map out how these data packets interact with standard biologics. Combining these therapies will remain restricted to the lab.
It is the agonizing gap between a brilliant scientific discovery and a safe medical reality. And it leaves us with one final mind-bending concept for you to consider based on that rheumatoid arthritis data.
Right, this is fascinating.
We know that a patient's own disease-driven exosomes are floating around their bloodstream right now, acting as bad flash drives, passing survival signals between disease cells to resist therapy.
This raises an important question for the future. If a patient is on a biologic therapy and we introduce our engineered therapeutic exosomes into their bloodstream, are we essentially starting a microscopic information war?
Will the patient's own disease-driven exosomes go to war with our therapeutic ones, fighting for control over the cellular receptors?
It's an invisible battle of data transfer happening millions of times a second in the blood.
Just imagine a future therapy that doesn't just deliver a chemical cure, but actively hacks into the disease's own communication network, literally jamming the signal of the bad exosomes while downloading the instructions for repair.
Now that is the next great frontier.
It really is something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and the next time you think about your biology, remember, your cells are always talking, constantly swapping those microscopic flash drives, and the conversation is infinitely more complex and dangerous than we ever imagined.